The airport lounge was cold and quiet. Rich travelers sat with sparkling watches, big bags, and loud voices. Waiters walked around with juice and snacks, smiling at people dressed in shiny suits and colorful dresses. But one man sat in a corner, alone. He wore a plain brown coat, old shoes, and carried only a small black bag. His face was calm like a still river. His eyes looked tired, like someone who had seen too much. Nobody smiled at him. Nobody even noticed him. Or so it seemed. The man looked at his ticket again. It clearly said, Flight 726, First Class, Seat 2A. But still, he waited quietly. Some people whispered, maybe he's lost. How did he get into the lounge? Then came Clara. She was a tall, fair-skinned flight attendant with shiny hair and bright red lipstick. Her heels clicked as she walked like a queen. Everyone loved Clara. She laughed loudly with a French businessman who held a golden briefcase. When Clara's eyes fell on the man in the corner, her smile disappeared. She walked straight to him. "Excuse me, sir," she said, forcing a fake smile. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" The man looked up kindly. "Yes," he said in a soft voice. "I'm waiting for Flight 726 to Dakar. First class." Clara's eyes narrowed. She tried to laugh, but it came out sharp. "First class? May I see your ticket?" The man quietly handed her the ticket. She stared at it too long, as if trying to find something wrong. Then she turned it over, held it to the light, and even smelled it, like it might be fake. "You must understand," Clara said loudly so others could hear, "we have strict rules. This lounge is for first-class travelers only. No exceptions." The man nodded. "Yes, madam. I understand." A younger flight attendant, who stood nearby, stepped forward. "Clara, it's a valid ticket," she whispered. "He belongs here." But Clara didn't stop. She laughed again, this time louder. "Well, let's see how this goes at the gate," she said, and walked off with a flip of her hair. The man stayed seated, still quiet. At the boarding gate, the line for first class was short. 2 businessmen, a woman in a golden dress, and the man with the brown coat. Everyone handed in their tickets without trouble. Then came the man's turn. Clara took the ticket again. She said, eyes cold. "This still looks wrong." She turned to the younger attendant. "Scan it." The young lady scanned the ticket. Beep. A green light. "Confirmed. First class, seat 2A, she said. Clara frowned. "Fine. But don't think you'll fool anyone once you're inside. Let's just hope you know how to act properly in first class." The man nodded. "Thank you," he said. People nearby looked uncomfortable. One man shook his head. "What's wrong with her?" he whispered to his wife. But Clara didn't care. She turned her charm back on as she welcomed the French businessman. "Welcome, Mr. Delisser. Your usual seat. Champagne." The man with the brown coat slowly walked down the jet bridge. His steps were steady, but the weight of shame followed him. Not because he was wrong, but because someone had treated him as if he didn't belong. Inside the plane, the first-class cabin sparkled like a hotel. Soft leather seats, golden lights, big screens, smiling faces. But the man didn't smile. He quietly placed his bag under the seat, sat down in seat 2A, and looked out the window. Clara passed him with a tray of drinks but didn't stop. She skipped him and gave drinks to everyone else. He said nothing. The younger attendant tried to help. "Would you like water, sir?" "Yes, thank you," he said. She handed it to him gently. Clara rolled her eyes. "He's lucky to even be here," she whispered under her breath. The plane's doors closed. Engines roared. The man leaned back in his seat, opened a small notebook, and began to write something. His pen moved slowly. His eyes were still calm. He was not angry, but something strong was inside him, like a quiet lion, waiting. The captain's voice came on. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We are ready for takeoff." As the plane climbed into the sky, the man looked out at the clouds and whispered, "Soon they will know." The plane hummed through the clouds. The sky outside was clear, a soft blue stretching for miles. But inside the first-class cabin, something felt wrong. It wasn't the plane or the weather, but the way Clara treated the man in seat 2A. She walked by him again, this time with a tray of snacks. She gave him a quick, cold look, then moved on. When she reached the next row, she stopped. "Would you like some almonds, sir?" she asked the man in 3, a well-dressed businessman with shiny shoes and a loud laugh. "Yes, please," he smiled. "How are you today?" "I'm doing great, thank you for asking." Clara smiled, her teeth gleaming white. The man in 3, his voice warm and friendly, enjoyed the attention. Clara lingered for a moment before walking away. She didn't even glance at the man in 2A. The man, however, didn't seem to mind. He calmly sipped his water and continued writing in his notebook. The hum of the airplane mixed with the sound of people chatting, but Clara's behavior gnawed at the air like a hungry insect. Service time. A while later, the flight attendants began serving the first-class meal. Clara moved up and down the aisle, placing food in front of everyone. She gave the businessman his meal, the woman in the golden dress her food, and the others their trays of delicious food. But when she got to the man in seat 2A, her eyes narrowed. Clara stopped. She looked at his seat as if it had a stain on it. "Here," she said, tossing a bottle of water onto the tray in front of him. "Enjoy." The water bottle bounced once, twice, and finally settled in front of him with a thud. Clara's eyes were sharp, but the man didn't react. He only nodded. The woman in 3B, a tall lady with big sunglasses, turned around to watch the scene. "That was rude," she whispered to her neighbor. Another passenger, an elderly man with glasses, leaned over to his wife. "I don't like the way she's treating him." The man in seat 2A didn't respond. He remained calm. He looked down at the water bottle, then back at his notebook. His mind was on something else. But his silence only made the tension grow stronger. The tension builds. As the flight continued, Clara's behavior became worse. She ignored him every chance she got. When the junior attendant offered him a hot towel, Clara waved her hand and said, "He doesn't need that." The younger attendant was shocked. "But I said, he doesn't need it." Clara snapped. Her eyes flashed with something dark. The junior attendant hesitated. "But, Clara, people are starting to notice." Clara turned sharply. "Let them notice. I don't care." It was obvious to everyone now. Clara wasn't just being rude. She was being cruel. And the man in seat 2A? He didn't fight back. He didn't shout. He didn't demand an apology. He only kept his silence. This only made people talk more. Whispers spread through the cabin. Everyone began to notice what was happening. Turbulence hits. It wasn't long before the plane hit the patch of turbulence. The sky shook, and the plane jolted left and right. Some passengers gasped. Others grabbed the armrests. Even Clara, who always seemed so sure of herself, looked uneasy. "Please, fasten your seatbelts," the captain's voice warned over the intercom. Everyone did except the man in seat 2A. He didn't even seem to notice the plane shaking. His pen moved slowly across his notebook. His eyes were calm, like a man who had weathered storms before. Clara walked past him again. This time, her face was tight with frustration. "Hey," she called out, her voice sharp. "You heard the captain. Buckle up." The man raised his head slowly. "I'm fine," he said politely. "Thank you." The turbulence hit again, harder this time, and the plane shook even more. Clara's eyes flashed with annoyance. She moved closer to him, standing over him with her hands on her hips. "I said..." But before she could say another word, a voice interrupted her. "Clara, can you please leave him alone?" It was the junior attendant, standing behind her with a warning in her eyes. Clara scoffed. "What's your problem? This man doesn't belong in first class. Someone should tell him that." Her words stung, louder now, as the other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Clara," the junior attendant said again, "people are filming this. You're being racist. You need to stop." But Clara didn't care. She shrugged. He's no different from a child who doesn't know how to behave. The plane hit another rough patch of turbulence, and everyone in first class held on tight. But the man in seat 2, calm, still, and composed, didn't move. The confrontation. It was at that moment that someone spoke up. The French businessman, the one who had been talking to Clara earlier, stood up from his seat. His suit was pressed neatly and his face looked stern. "That's enough, Clara," he said in a deep voice. "This man deserves the same respect as anyone else in this plane." Clara turned on him, her lips curling in irritation. "What's your problem, Mr. de Lysser? He's not even supposed to be here." François de Lysser shook his head. "You're wrong. You don't get to treat people like this just because you think they don't belong." The passengers around them were watching now. Many had their phones out, recording the argument. The noise grew louder. Clara's face went red. She clenched her fists, but then, with a final huff, she spun on her heel and stomped away. The man in seat 2A said nothing. He simply closed his notebook and placed it on the tray. He looked out of the window, letting the voices around him fade into the background. What's inside? The plane began its descent toward the city of Dakar. Clara had stormed off, but her coldness had left a lasting mark on the atmosphere. The man's calmness, however, had only deepened the mystery. Who was he? Why was everyone so confused about his presence? And why did Clara's attitude matter so much? As the plane touched the ground, the man's jacket collar slightly moved, revealing the emblem of a country. It was small, but clear to anyone who knew what to look for. A symbol of power. A symbol of leadership. And, most importantly, a symbol of someone who could not be disrespected. But Clara had no idea. Not yet. As the plane touched down on the tarmac, the passengers in first class stirred. The flight attendants quickly began to prepare for landing, but a strange, thick silence hung in the air. Everyone had been waiting for the plane to arrive, but it wasn't just the flight that had their attention now, it was the man in seat 2A. Clara had stormed off, her pride wounded, but there was more happening behind the scenes than anyone realized. As the plane taxied toward the gate, the junior attendant made her way to seat 2A. She was nervous, but she knew it had to be done. "Excuse me, sir," she said, softly and respectfully. I just wanted to apologize for what happened earlier. It wasn't right." The man looked up from his notebook and smiled. It was a quiet, knowing smile, like he had expected something like this. "It's all right," he replied in a calm voice. "You were just doing your job." The junior attendant hesitated for a moment. "I just wanted to make sure that you were okay," she continued. "You were treated unfairly, and I want you to know that not everyone here thinks that way." The man's eyes sparkled with appreciation. "Thank you," he said. "But don't worry. You didn't do anything wrong." It was as if the storm of tension that had surrounded the cabin finally began to lift. The man's gentle, measured response made everyone feel as though the situation wasn't so important after all, except for the few who were beginning to realize who he might really be. The power of a name. As the plane came to a stop at the gate, the passengers started to gather their things, preparing to leave. The man in seat 2A stood slowly, gathering his belongings. He wasn't in a rush. His demeanor remained calm, unaffected by the heated confrontation that had taken place just moments earlier. The moment he stood up, however, there was a change in the air. A few passengers turned their heads. Something about him made people take notice, as though there was more to this quiet man than they had realized. When he stood up fully, his coat fluttered open slightly, revealing the crest on his jacket, small, discreet, yet unmistakable. It was the emblem of a country. A nation that was not only respected but feared. The passengers who had noticed this emblem went still. The junior attendant, still standing nearby, caught a glimpse of the emblem. Her eyes widened in surprise. She had seen it before in the news. She'd heard the name before too, though she couldn't quite place it. One of the businessmen, a tall man who had been seated across from seat 2A, stood up, his voice suddenly strained. "Excuse me," he called to the man in seat 2A. "I couldn't help but notice your emblem. Are you, by any chance, Ibrahim Traoré?" The man's gaze shifted. He smiled, but this time, it was different. There was a quiet power in it. He nodded slightly. "Yes," he said. "I am Ibrahim Traoré." The businessman's face went pale. He stammered, "I didn't realize. I'm so sorry for my behavior earlier." "We all are." The news quickly spread through the cabin, rippling like a stone dropped into a pond. People who had been murmuring in disbelief suddenly fell silent, their eyes wide with realization. The quiet man in seat 2A wasn't just any man. He wasn't just an ordinary passenger with a first-class ticket. He was one of the most powerful leaders in Africa, a man whose presence commanded attention, a man who couldn't be disrespected. A king in disguise. Clara, who had been preparing to leave the plane, froze when she heard the name. Her hands shook slightly as she zipped up her bag, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely exposed. She had humiliated the man. She had treated him like an outsider, an intruder. As she looked around, the other passengers who had been watching her carefully now avoided her gaze. Many had their phones out, recording the moment, but no one said a word. No one needed to. Ibrahim Traoré stood quietly in the aisle, his presence not loud, but undeniably felt. His quiet dignity, the way he carried himself, had been enough to make people take notice. He had never needed to demand respect. It had always followed him wherever he went. And now, it was clear to everyone in the cabin just who he was. The junior attendant felt her heart race. "Mr. Traoré," she said, finally finding her voice. I had no idea." "It's okay," Ibrahim Traoré replied, his tone soft yet firm. "I don't need apologies. I just need respect, like anyone else." The lesson. Ibrahim Traoré turned toward the door as the jet bridge connected to the plane. He paused and looked around at the passengers, his gaze steady and calm. "You see," he said, his voice carrying a quiet strength, "this is not about race. It's not about appearance. This is about dignity. Everyone, no matter who they are, deserves to be treated with dignity." He turned to the junior attendant and smiled. "Thank you for your kindness. You showed me that there is still goodness in people, even when the world seems difficult." With that, he walked off the plane, his head held high. There was a brief pause as the passengers processed what had just happened. The man they had treated with suspicion and disrespect had just been revealed as one of the most powerful and respected leaders in Africa. And yet, it was his quiet strength, his refusal to let their disrespect touch him, that had made the biggest impression. Airplane departure, the final reflection. As the last few passengers disembarked, Clara was left alone in the cabin. The silence felt heavier now. The stain of her actions, her insults, seemed to hang in the air, thick and suffocating. She had disrespected someone powerful, someone who deserved nothing less than her full respect. Her colleagues had seen the videos, the ones that passengers had taken. They all had witnessed her coldness, her blatant racism, her attempts to humiliate a man who had, in the end, been a beacon of dignity. As she stepped off the plane, her mind was in a whirl. She couldn't escape the reality of what had just happened. She had crossed a line, one that couldn't be erased by a simple apology. In the end, Ibrahim Traoré had taught her something far more valuable than any lesson in respect. He had shown her the power of being quiet, of standing firm in the face of cruelty, and of never allowing anyone to define who you are based on how you look. The plane had landed, but the storm inside Clara had only just begun. As the last few passengers disembarked from the plane, Clara lingered in the cabin. Her hands trembled, the weight of her actions pressing heavily on her chest. The images from the past few hours replayed in her mind like a movie on repeat: the initial disrespect, the humiliation of Ibrahim Traoré, and the moment when his identity had been revealed to everyone on board. In the quiet of the now empty cabin, Clara couldn't escape the feeling that she had made a grave mistake, one that she could not easily undo. She had assumed that because of his simple appearance, Ibrahim did not belong in first class. She had treated him like an outsider, an intruder. But now, the world had shifted. The man she had humiliated wasn't just anyone. He was Ibrahim Traoré, the president of one of Africa's most powerful nations. The passengers had all seen the videos of Clara's cold behavior, and the junior attendant, who had stood by quietly during the confrontation, had already alerted her supervisor. Clara could feel her career slipping through her fingers, and the thought gnawed at her. This wasn't just about losing her job. This was about losing her dignity, her self-respect, and perhaps something deeper, her humanity. The unraveling. The next few days were filled with phone calls, meetings, and apologies. Clara's supervisor, a stern woman who had witnessed the viral video of the flight's events, called her into her office for a long discussion. The company had already issued a statement of apology to the passengers and to Ibrahim Traoré's team. Clara was told that an internal investigation would take place. Her supervisor, while stern, had a compassion that Clara didn't expect. "I understand that mistakes happen, Clara," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But you need to understand that the actions you displayed on that plane were unacceptable. The kind of disrespect you showed to Mr. Traoré cannot be justified, no matter what." Clara's eyes welled up with tears. "I didn't mean to disrespect him," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I just assumed. I didn't know who he was." "That's the problem, Clara," her supervisor responded gently. "You assumed based on how he looked. And that assumption caused harm. But I hope you will learn from this, and not just in your job, but in life." The days that followed were long and filled with reflection. Clara began to realize that it wasn't just about the job or the mistake she had made. It was about the world she had been living in. A world where appearances could determine how a person was treated. She had allowed herself to fall into that trap, believing that a person's worth could be judged by their clothes, their status, or their race. But Ibrahim Traoré had shown her that true worth is found in dignity, kindness, and strength, qualities that no one can take away, no matter how they look on the outside. The world turns. Meanwhile, Ibrahim Traoré continued his journey, but not without taking the time to reflect on what had happened. Though he had remained calm and composed throughout the flight, he couldn't help but feel the sting of Clara's treatment. He had dealt with discrimination and prejudice his entire life, but it still hurt when it came from someone who should have known better. As the president of his country, he often faced challenges that went beyond the personal. He was a symbol of power, yes, but he was also a symbol of resilience. His country had fought hard for independence, and he carried that weight on his shoulders every day. It wasn't just about politics, it was about representing his people, about showing them that no matter where they came from, no matter how humble their beginnings, they had the right to stand tall. In the days after the flight, Ibrahim spoke with his advisors about the incident, and they discussed the best way forward. But Ibrahim was not a man who held grudges. He believed in moving forward, in using every situation to educate and inspire. And he knew that this incident, though painful, could serve as a powerful lesson for others. The turning point for Clara. Clara, on the other hand, began to undergo a transformation. It wasn't just about saving her job anymore. It was about something deeper. She found herself drawn to the news stories about Ibrahim Traoré, watching his speeches and interviews. She saw the respect people had for him, not because of his title, but because of his character. And then one day, she came across a quote from one of his speeches that struck her deeply. "The true measure of a person's worth is not found in what they have, but in how they treat others, no matter how different they may seem." Clara sat in her apartment, staring at the quote on her screen. For the first time in days, she felt something shift inside her. She realized that her actions on the plane had not only disrespected Ibrahim Traoré, but they had also disrespected the values she had once believed in: equality, fairness, kindness. It was a wake-up call for Clara. She knew that she had to change, not just for her career, but for her soul. She didn't want to be the person who judged others based on their appearance. She wanted to be someone who saw the humanity in everyone, no matter who they were. A new beginning. Clara reached out to the junior attendant, asking for advice on how she could make things right. The attendant, who had been so kind to Ibrahim, offered Clara a simple but profound suggestion. Start by apologizing to Mr. Traoré. Not just because of your job, but because you truly understand what you did wrong. Clara knew it wasn't going to be easy, but she wrote a heartfelt letter to Ibrahim Traoré, apologizing for her actions. She admitted her mistake, acknowledged the harm she had caused, and expressed her desire to be a better person, both professionally and personally. Days later, Clara received a response. Ibrahim had read her letter and appreciated her honesty. In his reply, he thanked her for her courage in admitting her fault and offered her a kind word of advice. "We are all learning, Clara. And the most important lesson we can ever learn is the lesson of kindness and respect. You have the power to change the world, starting with yourself." The final flight. Months passed, and Clara found herself a different person. She continued working as a flight attendant, but now with a renewed sense of humility and respect for every passenger, no matter their background. She had learned to see people for who they truly were, not for the labels they wore or the status they held. On a particularly busy flight, Clara found herself standing near the front of the cabin once more. As she looked around, she saw a familiar face, a tall, dignified man sitting in seat 2A. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the face that had changed her life. It was Ibrahim Traore. This time, Clara knew what she had to do. She walked up to him, her steps steady, her heart calm. She smiled. "Mr. Traoré," she said softly, "I just wanted to say thank you for everything. You've taught me so much." Ibrahim looked up at her, his eyes warm. "I'm glad to hear that, Clara. And I believe you're going to do great things." As she walked away, Clara felt lighter than she had in a long time. The storm had passed. And in its wake, she was no longer just a flight attendant. She was someone who had learned to see the world through a new lens, a lens of respect, dignity, and kindness.